Rick,
Joy, and good to see you.
how are you, man?
All things considered, doing quite well.
Very good. Well, thanks for coming on our first live episode. As I think I've told you already, or you might have seen, we released a first episode not so long ago, and it wasn't live, it was pre-recorded. So here we are, live. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for taking the time.
No, glad to be here and happy to be on the inaugural first live video.
I hope we don't get trolled, or I don't get trolled too much, because I think people can send in questions and stuff. So let's see how that goes. Whereabouts are you at the moment? Have you managed to navigate some sort of COVID travel exemption?
Well, I had a very unique year and a half. I spent 12 months straight in Thailand. So March 17th to just 2 weeks ago, I spent the entire time in Thailand, which I say is arguably the best country to be locked down in around the world. 65 million people in Thailand. There were only 90 dead from COVID. So pretty spectacular in terms of keeping people healthy. The country was mostly open, which allowed me the great opportunity to travel within Thailand for the last 12 months. But I just relocated 2 weeks ago to Boston. So I am in my home city at this point.
It sounds like a strange decision, considering what you've just told me about being in one of the best countries in the world for lockdown and then heading to the US. But I also hear US is opening up too. I mean, it seems like your vaccine program is flying and things are opening up there too, right?
Yeah, I don't think as good as UK's. I think we're the fourth best country I've seen for vaccination rollout. So we're building up inertia. I'm still been making some calls and searching on websites to kind of secure my vaccination, but haven't had any luck yet. So hopefully in the next month or two. Yeah, I'm in the queue trying to jump it, but not really having any luck.
And why do you think Thailand was so? I mean, I've obviously seen bits and pieces on reasoning behind why it was so successful and stuff. But are there any things that jump out to you? Like why was it so good? Why were they able to keep numbers down so well?
Yeah, I would say one thing is they really did a hard shutdown to international arrivals. So there was a point in March, let's say, late March 25th, where they literally shut down the airports. You were locked in and no one was allowed to enter the country. Later, that ban was lifted, but if you wanted to come to Thailand, you had to get, 2 COVID tests. You would arrive in the country and you would have to spend 15 days at a government-approved hotel and then get a couple more COVID tests. So, they were very strict in allowing people in, and that was an excellent mechanism of keeping COVID out for the most part. So that was one of the things I think that made a difference compared to your homeland or the US, where, for all intents and purposes, there were still tons of flights coming in and out for most of the year.
Yeah, and then how were they managing internal travel? Was it just because there was low cases that people just could get on with things and travel was open internally? Is that right?
I forget the exact dates, but let's say April and May in Thailand, things were mostly shut down. And for those 2 months, I would only leave the house once or twice a week to do some food shopping, etc. Yeah. June, things opened up. I took my first trip to one of the islands. I started eating at restaurants which were socially distanced and, capped at the number of people you were allowed in. But, right before I flew back to Boston, I was at a bar that was packed with a great band playing. and it was, it was as if there was no COVID in the world. So,
yeah, what it was before. And is that what it's like there in Boston now as well? Have you gone from one great spot to another, or are the things a lot more shut down and a lot more protected?
I really haven't. I haven't really done much exploring when I've been in Boston. I mean, I've been to one you can go to a restaurant. So yeah, some things are open, but I went to a supermarket the other day. They were limiting the amount of people that could go in, etc. So it's definitely not the same as Bangkok, but it's not a hard shutdown here either.
Okay. Yeah, well, I didn't really want to go on too much about COVID.
Yeah, depressing.
It is quite, especially in the travel industry and running a travel business and trying to get people excited again. I think there was certain points where, like, I just became conscious of not even wanting to put stuff out there because people were getting so frustrated. The fact that because of the policies wherever they are, Australia, for example, they just as almost as strict as the UK. It's illegal to travel. So whatever you like about out there, but they're just not allowed to get on the plane. So hopefully things kind of change.
Well, have you heard of revenge travel?
Can't say I have.
Revenge travel is the concept of, the whole world has been locked down for so long. Revenge travel is referring to this incredible pent up demand of people's desire to travel. So I've heard and read some travel industry experts saying, when the floodgates do open, there's going to be some incredible pent up demand.
Yeah, I suppose what comes with that is also the underlying hope that it doesn't kind of all come back at once, and there's not this just free for all of suddenly back to, mass tourism and people just just an over amount of tourism. But hey, like I wouldn't necessarily be complaining myself. Speaking of that, though, you're a travel blogger, right? Is that how you would you call yourself a travel blogger or travel?
It's always tough with these labels, but I definitely use that terminology all the time. Content creator, travel blogger, influencer.
Because that profession, more than any, but in these times with travel, it must be one of the hardest hit as far as like what you're able to do. Like, what have you been doing in the meantime? Is there any like weird and wonderful things that you've kept you busy as a result? I know you said you've been in Thailand and things have still been open, but normally you'd be traveling consistently to various destinations, countries.
Yeah, as I said, I spent 12 months straight in Thailand. I've never done that on a typical year. Even though I say I live in Bangkok, I only spend around 90 days a year in Thailand.
Yeah.
From a content creation, for the most part, I was traveling in Thailand and writing about Thailand. So that was okay for me. The other thing I did was a series of blogs. I think it was about 5 different blogs. Instead of the 7 wonders of the world, it was 7 off the beaten path wonders of the world, 7 off the beaten path natural wonders of the world, 7 off the path dark tourism sites. So that kept me busy, like when we're in the lockdown period of during Thailand. So that kept me busy, and then again, I was fortunate enough to be able to travel for Thailand and have inspiration for fresh content during that time period.
What were some of those destinations or off the beaten path highlights out of those 7 that you just mentioned?
You mean what were the places I gave as examples?
Yeah, as examples.
Well, that's a little, I don't know if I'll be able to. So for an example, I think, and I'll have to, oh yeah, okay. So, I'm looking at the list of 7 wonders of the world, and then I'm like, okay, let's do the 7 off the beaten path wonders of the world. So 2 examples would be the Grand Mosque of Jenne. So the Grand Mosque of Jenne is located in Mali.
Yeah.
And this mosque is the largest mud structure in the world.
Yeah.
And it's in this village/town, which is like surrounded by like river. And it's almost like when I went there, it felt like going back 100 or 200 years in time. And, the streets are all just sand, they're sand streets. You walk around this little town, and in the center of town, there's just this grand, impressive structure. And you can just imagine the camels coming across the Sahara, bringing their, salt across the Sahara to, so just a timeless, amazing place to visit.
Yeah, it sounds pretty epic. I mean, the closest mud kind of largest structure I can visit. Have you ever been to Sana'a?
Sana'a? Yeah, in Yemen.
Yeah, the old town.
Which,
basically,
yeah, I mean,
like
that
a city of kind of clay structures.
Yeah, I know it's stunningly beautiful, Sana'a.
Amazing. I mean, that kind of gets me on to a point I wanted to chat to you, because I know you run a podcast, and I can't remember. I know I came on at some point, but I don't think it was talking about your main point of focus, which is interviewing people that have visited every country in the world or have an aspiration to visit every country in the world. Is that right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And yeah, it's always got me interested because that fascination with visiting every country in the world. What do you think? I mean, you must have an idea of what it is because you speak to people who have done it and are doing it, and you yourself are on a mission to do it as well, right? What's kind of is there like a common theme of like the driving point behind why people want to do it, why they want to visit every country in the world? And then also, the reason I'm asking is because when I kind of think about it, my immediate thought process is you're kind of just going to tick off a bunch of countries and actually not visit anything of, when I visit a country, you want to see the people, you want to see the places, you want to eat the food, maybe learn a bit of the language, all of the above. Is there a common theme? I mean, I'm getting at here.
Yeah. No, you're asking an excellent question. And I'm going to say the community, we'll call them extreme travelers, those people trying to travel to every country in the world. The community of extreme travelers is not a monolith, meaning I think there might be a schism in the community of those who are chasing 193. And I'll even make a demarcation point this isn't carved in stone, but let's say pre-2005, maybe only like 20 people had traveled to every country in the world.
Yeah, I'll put it really, you might be even getting to this, but I read probably on something that you've done, that there's more people that have been to space than have visited every country in the world. Is that still a valid fact?
As far as we know. So my podcast intro states that more people have traveled to outer space than have been to every country in the world. And to me, that's difficult to get your arms around. So approximately 570 or so people have been to outer space, and give or take, the known people that have traveled to every country in the world is probably around 250 people. And as I was saying before, let's say before 2005, maybe 20 or 25 people had traveled to every country in the world. In 2019, that year alone, 40 people accomplished the goal.
So they reached that target in 2019.
In 2019, 40 people, give or take, finished the quest.
Okay.
And before '05, there was only 20 people or so. So what I'm getting at is pre-internet, traveling to every country in the world was not a thing. And I think the handful of people who were doing it mostly simply for the magic of travel and the exploration and discovery, et cetera, et cetera. As time marched on and, Instagramming became more prevalent, there was a transition within the Chasing 193 community where there was a new group of people who were doing it for the recognition or the record. Could be a Guinness World Record. It could be I'm the youngest person from Serbia to have traveled to every country in the world. I am the first LGBT person to travel to every country in the world. I'm the youngest, the fastest, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. A lot of those people are, and I'm generalizing because there's always exceptions, a lot of those people are more checking the boxes. They're not doing as deep as travel as maybe the other school of people chasing 193 who are more deliberate, who travel deeper, who travel more slowly, who are not worried about Instagramming or the records or the recognition. Right.
I think you've covered that pretty well. Is there then... Yeah, so it seems like there's potentially a group of people that are in it for there's a speed, because there's also those records now that I've seen various, I guess, I don't know how recent it was, but the fastest person to have done it, the youngest person to have done it. And I guess as long as those records are there on the Guinness Book of Records, they're going to be there to be broken, right? So they're going to set out to break that. There's also a hot topic, not a hot topic, because I think it's pretty recognized. The 193 number that's the UN recognized number of the total amount of countries the UN recognizes. There also seems to be a bit of a debate within that community of the number of countries recognized, because I think there's obviously places like Taiwan that sit outside of that.
Yeah, I mean, you're asking another excellent question or divisive question within the community.
Right.
And you would think this is a simple question with a simple answer, but it's far from it. So how many countries are there in the world? And it's a opaque rabbit hole that you can dive into and have fun, drinking numerous beers, debating the topic. I would say the most common denominator is 193, which is, as you just said, 193 countries are recognized by the United Nations. And then very quickly, someone will go, but what about, so the first two people might ask about is the Vatican and Palestine. Neither of those are part of the 193, but those two are classified as observer states. So that brings you to 195. And then quickly, as you said, it could be, what about Taiwan? What about Kosovo? And you can keep on going on further and further from that discussion point.
Is there like a secondary agreed number where there's another smaller amount of people that says actually there's, because of those countries you said, Vatican, Taiwan, Kosovo, Palestine?
Well, I mean,
let's just go on and gets deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole.
Yeah. So let's put it this way. So, I mean, very quickly someone could go, oh, I'm 195 because, you have that designation of an observer state. But many people will say 196 or 197. And they'll, I think the two most typical that will be added in will be Taiwan and Kosovo, which are hard to argue are not countries. I mean, they have borders and armies and flags and functioning governments, et cetera, et cetera. But that category are countries with partially recognized. Those two countries are those countries which are recognized by some UN states, meaning, and I don't have these numbers memorized, Kosovo is recognized by 100 countries in the UN. Taiwan is recognized by 14 countries in the UN. And so they'll go, oh, I'm going to be at 197, 2 observer states, Taiwan and Kosovo.
Okay.
But there are 6 countries in that category, meaning if someone goes to me, oh, I recognize Taiwan, so I'm at 196, I'm going to go, well, why isn't Abkhazia and North Ossetia on your list?
Abkhazia, what's that?
Abkhazia and North Ossetia are 2 breakaway republics in the sovereign state of Georgia, the country.
Okay. Yeah.
So both of these breakaway de facto countries have an army, a flag, a national anthem, a government, and they are also recognized by other UN member states. So same thing as same thing as Taiwan and Kosovo, because they are recognized by some UN member states. But again, you can keep on going down and further down this list.
Yeah. And there's something else I wanted to ask while we're still talking about visiting every country and things. You've also, you've spoken to, I guess, hundreds of people that have visited every country or on a mission to visit every country. Is there, like, I'm assuming, obviously, visas is probably one of the biggest challenges. Is it? And then, getting access to visas, is that one of the hardest things, or
can be? So, I mean, I think if you're going top down, the 2 macro concerns are time and money. Yeah. And then if you drill down a level after that, assuming you have time, assuming you have some money, then I would say the 3 challenges are visas, security, and logistics. But visa is definitely can be a high hurdle to cross for many people.
Yeah, depending where you're from. I saw, and again, this is getting into maybe a little bit craziness, but you've also spoken to people, because I follow one of them, a fellow countryman of mine, Kenyan guy. You'll have to remind me of his name, but he's visited every single country in the world twice.
Yeah, so you're talking about this fascinating gentleman I interviewed for my podcast, Counting Countries. Everybody subscribe. So this guy's name is Sławek Mutari. Kenyan father, Polish mother, grew up in Poland, and he has traveled to every country in the world twice. And based upon my little research, there's 3 people who have done that. So you talk about crazily elite. Sławek Mutari is in this category. And I think what you're getting at is he holds a Polish and Kenyan passport. These are nowhere as strong as a UK, US, Japanese passport.
Canadian,
So he has to jump through a couple more hoops. But I mean, I don't feel that bad for him because they're relatively strong, and he also has the ability to toggle between the 2 of them.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, obviously, having a Kenyan passport would get you pretty easy access to a lot of the certainly East African and other countries, which is, and then obviously his Polish passport, well, naturally, European, and it's fairly strong, isn't it? Well, 2 times around the world. I'm assuming, again, I'm guessing you could probably answer this, but he's done it the first time, like, probably quite quickly, and now really enjoying time in places that he's visited.
And I apologize because I have interviewed a lot of people and I can't recall their stories specifically, but he is, I think I would, categorize him more of a slow traveler type. And I think, he's probably mid or late 50s, and he started traveling, like, let's say as an older teenager. So he's doing, I would say, more slow, deliberative travel, and really, and he's very fond of ground transportation and crossing borders. So he's taking more of his time.
Is that your style as well? I know you're on a quest to tick off and visit all countries in the world. The last time I checked, and probably the last time I spoke to you, you were on something around 130 or 135. Is that right?
I'm at 142. So I snuck in 2 new countries in 2020 before the borders closed.
Yeah.
And obviously I've been frozen at that number. I think it's difficult to pigeonhole myself, meaning sometimes it's flying point to point, other times it's road trips. When I was doing my last travels in March of last year, it was supposed to be a 6-country West African road trip by car. So, I mean,
driving yourself or with a driver guide, or
we had I had 2 friends with me and a driver who I'd met 2 or 3 years ago in Burkina Faso. So this gentleman, Marlon, this is my 3rd road trip with him. So, he's a driver / guide. I also consider him a friend of mine, and I'm looking forward to picking up where we left on that road trip. I mean, it might not be till next year, which is questioning. Well, we started off in Senegal. We made it to Gambia, and we flew home on March 16th of last year from Gambia, but we still had Guinea-Bissau, Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia left on that.
So my West African geography is not that great, but you picked up the car in Senegal. You've done driven through Senegal and then various other countries, crossing border by car. Is that right?
Well, I've done more than
driving across.
Well, I've done more than 1 road trip in West Africa, but this one was supposed to be 6 countries, Senegal to Liberia, but we only made it to the 2nd country, and then we flew home so we didn't get stuck, in West Africa due to COVID.
Yeah, I mean, can't say that you would have. Yeah, it would have been too great to be locked down in West Africa for 12 months.
We were speculating in hindsight that we might have got locked down in Guinea-Bissau. And the reality is Guinea-Bissau is, I think top 5 poorest countries in Africa. And it's also sort of like a failed state. So it's one of those places maybe the first week would have been okay, but it's then we're worried about is there going to be food issues or electricity issues? And, so, I mean, that was worst case scenario that we were imagining.
Yeah. And then, not surprisingly, but I think everybody thought that, I say everybody, again, a huge generalization again, but a lot of people assumed that when COVID kind of struck Africa, it would have been Africa and other developing countries, that it would be the huge humanitarian disaster, when actually a lot of those countries managed them way better than certainly some of the Western more developed world. So yeah, that's
I remember reading one article last year, and I was so fearful for the continent, and it was basically kind of this article overviewing the medical capacities of a lot of these sub-Saharan countries. And there's one section they're talking about ventilators, and I don't know the exact number, but for instance, Burkina Faso, the whole country, they only had 7 ventilators. So I'm so thankful that these countries were not, wiped out in the same way, US or UK were, because they just don't have those deeper resources. So we should be thankful about that.
100%. Yeah. I mean, I went to Kenya. I went back home in December. I managed to, there was no lockdown at the time, managed to get out and go see my family. And I think there's some really interesting kind of data and studies that are coming out of certainly Kenya, of when actually there was potentially COVID in the country. And it looks like there's evidence that it was well before well before people imagined. So it looks like people had been living with it for a lot longer than was expected. Back to road trips, because you know how much I love road trips. Tend to focus being on the tuk-tuk as opposed to cars. But I want to talk a little bit about your memories of the Cambo Challenge, because it's been a while since we, well, obviously we had a year off from travel last year because we weren't able to, but we did one in a slightly changed format in 2019, where we've kind of pivoted away from, which I'm sure you'll share some of your stories, but we pivoted away from like the traditional Cambodian tuk-tuk, auto remorque is what they call there, into the more world-renowned kind of traditional three-wheeler tuk-tuk, the Dutch rickshaw, Indian-made style. Before we do that, actually, why not? I wanted to share a video because just so people know, and you're probably going to talk further on this. You made an awesome documentary on this, and your filmmakers shared an amazing little video, which I'm going to try and play now, and then see. Well, hopefully it plays. So let's just give this a little go in an intro. Hang on a second. Yeah, that's still one of my favorite videos. It's so good, isn't it? I mean, not to be biased at all, but yeah. What are your memories? I just also realized that now that's almost 6 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, watching that video and hearing that music thumping, I'm like, it got me both excited and sad, meaning, we've all taken like a year off from travel and we're missing out on all these amazing experiences. And then, watching that video triggered a bunch of memories from that road trip. And it was road trips are awesome. This was an awesome road trip, and it's an amazing country, and you're driving this amazing vehicle, which opens up doors and experiences. And it was such a fun time.
What were your, I always like understanding, because I'm so used to driving tuk-tuks and have just been doing it consistently for the last kind of 10 years. It's so easy for me to forget actually someone who's never driven a tuk-tuk, and that experience, because it's not like driving a car. Once you can drive a car, you kind of can hop in and out of any car. It's got its own little things to get used to, and in particular the one in Cambodia. I mean, it was a manual, crappy little
110cc,
110cc, strapped with a 500 kilo trailer on the back. No extra braking system between the bike and the trailer. You can see why I'm getting at why we actually changed the mode of transport. But what were your memories of kind of your first interaction with getting on that vehicle, with the realization that you've got to take this thing 1,600 kilometers around Cambodia? Because at that time we were still doing the full loop of pretty much Cambodia. We didn't go to the northeast up to like Sen Monorom and the border with Laos, but we went, we started in Siem Reap, we finished in Siem Reap, we did the loop kind of all the way down south
to the beach,
and then came up the southern part of the lake. At that point in 2015, and there was a lot of construction on the major roads. There was a lot less when I was there last, but there was considerable construction, meaning obviously a lot of off-roading. What was your first kind of experience when you kind of jumped on, or memories when you jumped on that vehicle?
Well, embarrassingly, I've never really driven a manual car. So I grew up driving automatic and only drove automatic. I did have the experience of driving a tuk-tuk in India for 2 weeks in a tuk-tuk for 2,000 kilometers. So, that gave me some familiarity and some comfort. But you guys have the first day, which is training, meaning you get to practice.
Yeah.
And I personally need that day to kind of, bring back some of that muscle memory and kind of, as you said, they're tuk-tuks, but there's a distinct difference between the traditional tuk-tuk and the auto remote in Cambodia. So yeah, I needed to familiarize myself and get used to the gears and having the 500 kilo carriage plus my friend driving behind. So yeah, I needed and wanted that first day to get my familiarity with the bike and to be able to drive that around.
Yeah, that what you said about the manual car, that is not uncommon at all now. At all. I mean, I was the opposite. I'd growing up in Kenya and driving from a young age, it was always a manual car. So I think it was definitely something to do with, the practicality of fixing gearboxes when they break down. Automatic gearboxes were always more of a challenge to fix. But it's by no means uncommon nowadays for most people to, even with the traditional Indian rickshaw, there's still the gears on the handlebars, which can be even more kind of disconcerting when you've got gears on the left hand and then you've got to change. The training days are always very entertaining because you've got a bunch of people from all over, all in the same boat, and then factored into the novelty of the destination, the culture of driving, the standard of roads, all of those things. That makes for a pretty good cocktail of
adventure,
craziness. Yeah. Was it your first time in Cambodia? Like when you came on that trip?
No, that was actually my third time there.
Okay. And what were your? I'm assuming you'd not obviously driven a rickshaw and a tuk-tuk or anything in Cambodia before.
No.
What were your memories of, the comparison? Like if you've been there before and then now this time taking it on, like what advantages or disadvantages did you find with driving the tuk-tuk?
Yeah, I mean, first I'll start off and just say, Cambodia is an undervalued country. It is fantastic. Everybody should be going. If you're traveling, there's so much to see and do there. My first two visits were more traditional, meaning Phnom Penh, the capital, and Siem Reap to go see Angkor Wat. So I'm personally fascinated with the temples in Siem Reap. So I'm more than happy to spend 5 days just exploring those. But I think, in my opinion, these rallies that you manage and organize offer they provide an excellent catalyst, meaning if you're a traveler to Cambodia, you might get stuck in the trap of what I just said, Phnom Penh, Siem Reap, maybe the beach in Sukarnoville. And there's nothing wrong with that. But what the tuk-tuk does and your route that you provide is you are going to be visiting and sleeping over places that the typical visitor might not necessarily be visiting. So in other words, you open your horizons, get to see more, get to explore more, get out of the tourist sections of the country. So that's awesome benefit. And then the side benefit is you could hypothetically do your rally in a $100,000 Range Rover. You have the AC pumped up, you've got the Dolby surround sound going, and you are having an awesome adventure. But when you're on the tuk-tuk, there's obviously no windows, you're completely open, and you're driving next to another Cambodian on his bike and you just start talking on the road, or you stop at an intersection and there's some woman selling sugarcane juice and you start talking. So there's all these great catalysts that your rallies provide of visiting off the beaten path and also starting more genuine interactions with the locals.
100%. I mean, I think people who listen to me in general bang on about tuk-tuks will probably have heard this a million times, like how it is the greatest like platform for adventure. Like, I love motorbikes, I love cars, obviously I love road trips, but that just what you've explained there about that kind of balance between, you know, between speed, openness, access to the local population, to the local like sounds, and then Cambodia especially. I mean, we were doing it kind of, I think it was just after wet season, so there was a lot of water, and Cambodia is kind of defined between, you know, dry season, wet season. Completely different, contrasting lands, like countries almost in dry season. Wet season, like a lot of people out, a lot of people fishing. The bugs, you probably remember one of our challenges there, the food challenges in Cambodia, just because of the kind of diversity of the protein, the bug life is pretty impressive. Well, yeah, were there any other highlights of actually any of the place? I mean, like you said, I personally love the temples and that history of Cambodia is just amazing. And the first night we stayed in, we were lucky enough to stay in, I think it's the Beng Malair temple, which is that one like 60 kilometers outside of Siem Reap, where it's completely ruined. Yeah, where we camped. Yeah, that was.
I was thinking of one story when I saw the video, which it reminded me of. And for those who are not that familiar with the rally, is you earn points, which you determine the winner. So it's like every day there's challenges, and I can't remember the exact thing, but we had to, the hint was like pound rice. And we had to videotape ourselves pounding rice. And it's, you know, I think the hint said, you'll know it when you see it.
Yeah.
And my friend and I, Keith, who I was driving around with, you know, we're not in any city. It's just back roads and houses scattered here. And we have our eyes peeled. We're trying to find pound rice. And we pass some poor person's house, and they have all this rice laid out on sheets. I assume they're drying the rice. And we're like, maybe this is it. So we park our tuk-tuk and we basically go into these people's property, into their house. They're all like, you know, sitting around eating. And we're like, Susade, hello. You know, we know, you know, one word and Khmer. And they kind of come out of their house and we're standing next to all their rice, which is drying out. And I think we start like taking a rock and like hitting some of the rice, and we're videoing it. Yeah, and these people, I mean, we might as well have been aliens, right? So two foreigners show up on a tuk-tuk, which
in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, which is very atypical, right? No foreigners are driving.
Well, nobody goes there. Yeah.
No one goes there. Then we basically go into their private property, and then we start like looking like, crazy people hitting the rice. So in short, we were in the completely wrong place, having no correlation to the challenge that we were supposed to be doing, because an hour later we end up in front of this small business where they have like some wooden logs set up where they're pounding the rice.
Yeah.
So we're just laughing like those poor people must think we're absolutely crazy people. Because again, imagine if someone came into your house and so just brought back the memory of that kind of funny experience.
Yeah, there's a challenge that we do in Sri Lanka where, and in India as well, where we basically find a family to host you for lunch, and you provide, you bring the ingredients to learn how to cook a lunch. Basically, it tends to be like a curry based lunch from all the ingredients that we give, and I've been threatening to do that here. I've got a tuk-tuk. I think I told you I've got a tuk-tuk here in London, and I've been threatening to go into kind of the countryside here with like a roast and a lunch, and rock up at someone's
Sunday
house.
Roast.
Be like, hey, Sunday roast. Do you want to, just to see how that goes?
Yeah. And the US, you did what my friend and I did. You get shot. Here in Cambodia, they're just, some big smiles and maybe rolling of the eyes.
Yeah. Have you ever done? I know you've done India in a tuk-tuk. Have you got any other plans? I'll probably be able to convince you to join us on another one at some point. But have you got any other like road trips coming up? I know you said you're planning to go back and jump on your African, your West Africa extension. But have you got any other road trips planned, or any other like big bucket list trips that you got coming up? I say plan, very loosely.
All I do is fantasize about bucket list and adding additional items to the bucket list. All I have is a hope, and my hope is, let's say sometime in September, start traveling again. Nothing concrete, nothing on paper, no reservations booked, just hope that it's a better situation to travel on.
You're in the space, right? So you're probably closer to most, as far as you'll probably want to be one of the first people to travel as soon as you can. What are your predictions for realistically, like getting back to, those off the beaten path places, countries that you were, hoping to carry on your kind of quest for visiting every country, but just more in general, like what's your best estimate when things will kind of really open up again and be, well, remotely okay?
Well, I'm the least expert person for you to ask. I'm hoping vaccine distribution continues at a pretty good pace, like US and UK. I hope Europe gets its act together, and things will open up in Q3, Q4 of this year. But with that said, the countries or areas I just named, I'm missing the vast majority of the world. 54 countries in Africa, which probably only have a couple of million vaccines total across the whole continent. So, and, people talk about vaccine passports, which I'm very pro, meaning I'm very pro if they come up with a universal passport which is globally accepted and it's going to make my life easier. So I'm very hopeful that they'll develop some sort of mechanism, like demonstrating and showing you have a yellow fever vaccine, which is required for some countries, as like in Africa and South America. So hopeful, but obviously there are so many unknown variables and so many roadblocks, which we can only imagine.
So do you foresee kind of like airlines just requiring this as a like a standard. I know the CEO of Qantas seems to be like the spokesperson for Australian tourism these days, but like he seems to always be on the record. And from what I've read and understand, he's basically saying that they're going to require a vaccine passport at some point just to get on the plane. Do you think that's like something realistic? Or
I mean, it sounds good on paper, right? But implementing it, meaning, you have 193 countries with 1,000 different airlines, and then you have hundreds of millions of different passengers who at some point will be flying during that year. So, right, I mean, that's so many moving parts. Again, it's great that the CEO of Qantas wants a global passport or vaccine demonstration, but what about Emirates, or what about BA, or what about a local airline flying only within West Africa? Meaning, whether it's IATA, the airline industry group, somewhat, in my opinion, to make it work, to make it stick, you need a global set of rules. It
needs to be done by something like the World Health Organization.
It's no good. I mean, what's worse will be, 500 different patchworks of different rules and regulations, which we basically have now, which no one definitively knows the real answers or the rules, and you have to jump through hoops, because I've heard of people, people are like flying, let's say, someone a friend of a friend, like, flew from, like, let's say London to Dubai, and then they were flying to Rwanda. But when they got to Dubai, they're like, okay, let me see your COVID test, which is required for Rwanda. And the person produced the COVID test, and the airport person's like, oh, that's the wrong type of COVID test. You can't fly to Rwanda. Now they're stuck in Dubai. They missed their flight. They missed their beginning of the trip in Rwanda. And then they come back the next day and they found out the airline official made a mistake and they did have the right type of test. Or, I know another person who was in Kenya, and they were flying home to Indonesia, and they take their COVID test so they can fly home to Indonesia. But guess what? When they're in Kenya, they got COVID. So then they got stuck in Nairobi for 10 days, and they had to quarantine in a hotel and wait till they got a negative COVID test. So, I mean, there's just so many challenges that we're facing. It's overwhelming.
Yeah, that's welcome. I guess welcome to what the future of travel looks like. And running. I mean, those are our biggest like, obviously, people are desperate to get out there again, but what it's going to look like is just very, very different from what it was before. And the main question is the like the places where we operate. Obviously, Sri Lanka, India. We're going to be going to Pakistan, Philippines, Cambodia, Italy. They've all got their own issues. Like you're seeing Italy now has got like a higher coming into like almost like a third wave. I think they're calling it. And then vaccination programs, other countries better than others. But anyway, we won't go on about COVID too long. Well,
too depressing.
Yeah, you can say that. Rick, I think we're just about coming to the end of the time that I've got here with you. So, last point, is there anything like advice you'd give to someone thinking about coming on a tuk-tuk trip or tuk-tuk adventure that you from your, I know it was a while ago now in Cambodia, but any
I mean, the short advice is do it. And again, I'm going to go back to the themes which I touched on before. Meaning the tuk-tuks or the rallies act as this catalyst or mechanism, one, to get you off the beaten path, two, to give you these more genuine, interesting, authentic interactions with locals. And I think many of us travel because you want to meet local people and learn a little bit about their life. I remember for my Indian tuk-tuk race, we spent so much time at gas stations, and the gas stations
For
in
repairs
India,
or for fuel or both, I guess.
Mostly for fuel. And I still never figured this out. Every gas station in India seems to be manned by about 20 people, 20 guys.
Yeah.
So it would not be odd for us to spend an hour at the gas station filling up, but then talking to the gas station attendants and the hanger-oners, taking photos, eating a samosa. So, the vast majority of people who book a vacation to India, it's like, oh, I'm going to go to the Taj Mahal or houseboat in Kerala. No one says, I'm planning on visiting 2 gas stations a day for an hour each to take photos and to hang out with guys. So again, I think these rallies, whether it's your Sri Lanka one, the Cambodia one, Italy, it's just a really different, great way to explore the country.
Yeah, I agree. Not being biased at all, but
no, not at all.
Yeah, and I expect. I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to speak to people like you and speak to past participants, people have done it, is hear their stories, because I obviously don't get to experience a lot of that some of the time because I'm doing other things, and it's nice to hear like firsthand like what the actual like experience on the road was, and kind of relive that because I obviously did a lot in general in between, so yeah, know exactly what you mean. What about, where can people find your information then, Rick? Info about you, your Counting Countries podcast and stuff like that?
Yeah, if interested, you can go to any podcast player, type in Counting Countries. It's a very niche podcast, as you've pointed out, interviewing people who've traveled to every country in the world or are in the process of doing so, and they're very, very long format interviews. Or you can just Google Global Gaz, GAZ, and you'll see my blog and social media, etc.
Awesome. And I will also put your info in the notes of this podcast so people can check it out and follow you and look you up. And especially that video that you put together of the kind of details behind every country in the world. It's really, really the nuances between how many countries there are, the discrepancy, really good. So
yeah, if you like geography or trivia, it's again a wormhole of fascinating geography trivia, this video I made.
Brilliant. Well, thanks a lot for coming on, Rick. It was a pleasure to see you again. It's been a while, and to speak to you, and hopefully we'll see you on a tuk-tuk soon. Maybe Pakistan is for you.
I would love that. Yeah. So you and I are 2 continent friends. We've hung out in Cambodia and Germany. So we got Europe and Asia. So we might also have to broach seeing each other on the 3rd continent.
Well, Africa sounds like an obvious one to me.
Agreed.
Cool.
Thank you, Julian.
Take it easy.
Great seeing you again.
Cheers.